Ja, einen schönen guten Nachmittag, liebe Zuseherinnen und Zuseher, und willkommen zu unserem Webinar Games in the Nordics, das die Kreativwirtschaft Austria gemeinsam mit uns, der Außenwirtschaft Austria, veranstaltet. Neue Wege gehen und über den nationalen Tellerrand hinausschauen, ist ja für Kreativunternehmen ganz normal. Aber um eben Sie dabei zu unterstützen und Ihnen auch innovative Geschäftsmodelle aus aller Welt zu präsentieren, veranstalten wir gemeinsam mit der Kreativwirtschaft Austria eben diese Webinare. Mein Name ist Cosima Steiner, ich bin die Wirtschaftsdelegierte in Kopenhagen und freue mich, dass wir schon zum zweiten Mal mit der Kreativwirtschaft ein derartiges Webinar veranstalten können. Und diesmal sind wir aber noch besser aufgestellt, weil gemeinsam ist besser als einsam. Es geht heute nicht nur um Dänemark, sondern auch um die Länder Finnland und Schweden und deren dynamische Game Developer Landschaft. Somit auch ein fröhliches Hey in den höheren Norden hinauf, nach Richtung Schweden und Finnland. So I will switch to English now because the webinar language is English. Makes it also much easier to the presenters today. And I would like to introduce all of them. So first, let's start with Denmark from Fenrir Games Studio, Pirate and Light Kenneth, or Kenneth Light, yeah. Pirate, he's the production manager of Fenrir, and Light, you're the technical lead. And then also hello to Finland, Helsinki, Stefan Demitjan, from a company that does not need much of an introduction. You're game lead at Supercell. And then finally also hey again to Sweden, to Laura. She's from Valiant Game Studio, and you're also a professional dragon. I think you will explain a little bit later what that means. So Stefan and Laura will join us a little bit later when their presentations are coming up. So see you again. And I will quickly walk you through what the agenda or what the next 1.5 hours have in charge for us. Welcome introduction. We're right in the midst of it. I will try to keep myself as short as possible. And then we start with the presentations. First, Fenrir Game Studio for talking about their own success story and also a little bit about the Danish market. You're a smaller game studio, but have a very innovative business model, and will tell us how to stay relevant in a very competitive environment. And I also like to say thank you because you're hosting us here today as well in your very hyggligt, that's Danish for cozy, in your hyggligt studio. And then afterwards, we will have Supercell. So Stefan will talk about the success story of Supercell, and I think also about his own story, because he's originally from Austria, if I'm not mistaken. And then finally, Laura from Valiant Game Studio will talk about the Swedish way to start an independent game studio. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So the presentations will last for about 20 minutes, and they will be followed for about 5 minutes question and answer with the individual presenters. And then afterwards, we'll have about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes for a common Q&A. You are welcome to ask your questions at any point in time, not orally, but by typing them in to your question box. We'll collect them and address them during the Q&A sessions. And if your question has not been answered, please do not despair. We will find an answer for you also after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded onto YouTube. You will get the link, which you can share. You can rewatch the webinar at any point in time. If you cannot fall asleep in the evenings or if you missed something very essential. And then also the presentation slides will be shared with you after the webinar as well. I will briefly switch back into German, just to say a few words, as you say, in eigener Sache. Einfach um Ihnen kurz zu sagen, wer ist eigentlich die Außenwirtschaft Austria? Wir sind Österreichs Internationalisierungsagentur und unterstützen österreichische Unternehmen und natürlich auch Kreativwirtschaftsunternehmen bei ihrer Internationalisierung mit über 100 Stützpunkten in der ganzen Welt, in über 70 Märkten. Wir präsentieren österreichische Firmen im Ausland, wir schaffen für sie Geschäftskontakte, helfen ihnen bei der Geschäftsanbahnung und Geschäftsabwicklung und sollte dem so sein, was hoffentlich nicht passiert, auch natürlich, wenn es Probleme gibt. Und auf der anderen Seite sind wir auch Internationalisierungsagentur. Das bedeutet, wir bringen gute Ideen und innovative Konzepte aus aller Welt zu Ihnen nach Österreich und informieren Sie. Und die sammeln wir in unseren Partnernetzwerken in den Innovationshubs auf der gesamten Welt. Und die Kreativwirtschaft Austria ist natürlich auch für die Kreativwirtschaftsunternehmen da, vernetzt sie und bringt eben genau mit diesen Kreativwirtschaftswebinaren einfach die innovativen Geschäftsmodelle, die neuen Trends und dergleichen aus aller Welt zu Ihnen an den Schreibtisch. Back to English and back to the topic it's all about today, the Nordic game industry, the Nordic games industry. And just to say a few words in a nutshell, because I'm really not an expert in this topic, and we have the presenters to talk about it. But why are we having this webinar? Because you know, being living in the Nordics and having our offices in the Nordics, I can speak for myself and also the colleagues in Stockholm who cover also Finland, Sweden, and Norway. We've seen it's a very dynamic market, and it has developed into one of the very dynamic game development regions in the world, with Finland leading the pack, has seen enormous growth rates, of course, taken the opportunities that the smartphone revolution has posed. Turnover-wise, Finland is in the lead, whereas Sweden is actually very impressive when it comes to brand width and scope. Denmark is a relatively smaller market, but also hosts a number of renowned international companies who are very successful in the games development area, and also has made a name for itself in the edtech industry as of late. And then also esports is very popular, especially in Denmark and in Sweden. And I think both Denmark and Sweden are among the top of the list when it comes to esports worldwide. So that of course also bodes well for the industry. But enough from me. Let's hear the experts speak, and let's start with Fenrir Games Studio, Pirate and Light. I look forward to hearing your presentation, and I will make a quick exit and see you later.
Yeah, so we'll take over from here. Yeah, as was presented before, we are Fenrir Games Studio. This is Pirate, and I'm Light. And we founded the game Fenrir Games Studio some time back, and we'll tell you how we got to this point and basically how it can be hard to be a Danish game developer and how we progress through this market. So in the beginning for us, it was kind of hard to figure out. We were fresh out of university and had a hard time figuring out where we wanted to go. So we had one thing that kept basically promising us that we could do better, and that was this specific thing. We were very inspired to change the world, and this is something that have been basically relevant to every single product that we have developed in one way or another. And we keep thinking about new ways to change the world or constantly question what's already there. So we asked the question, can we change the world with games? And to be honest, we're still working on that, but we are progressing. So it's one step at a time, but we really feel like this is actually something that can be done. So a little bit about our background. Will you like to start?
Yeah, so we came out as Light said, fresh from university. We were in Copenhagen at the Aalborg University. We both have a degree in mediology. It's a broad education, so we learned a lot about games, movies, television, a lot of stuff. And there we found each other. Me and Light actually go way back, but held a break for a few years, and then we find each other at this same education. It was rather funny. And Light was really into games, and she made a game company, and I was like, sure, let's do it. It sounds super cool. So we started to use some of our vacation, and also a lot of the projects we made at the university actually evolved around games, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so from there we basically, after having spent a lot of vacations and so on, we said, okay, so we are already doing this, and we're already spending a lot of time doing this, so why not just go the extra mile and found our own game studio. So we did that, and the next question was, well, how do we get money? So we basically founded the game studio and had a hard time figuring out, well, how do we progress through this seemingly difficult and very dynamic world of games development? And we said one thing from the start, and that was, we're not going to have any investors. And the reason for this is basically because we wanted to be free to do whatever we wanted. It was very important for us that when we had an idea to how to change the world with games, we wanted to pursue that. And that basically led us to the next point, which is EduGame. So EduGame is an initiative that's been taken here in Denmark to try to educate students, very, very young students from, I think the lowest I've been teaching is like a 5th grade. And,
to 5th grade and upwards.
So basically, we're teaching them game development and teaching them how to do programming in Unity, the game engine Unity. And the way this is done is basically just to make sure that the students, they are encouraged to do this and they feel like it's very, very fun. And we have had a huge success with this. So it's another company that we basically helped get going, and we still have a very good relation with them.
Yeah, I want to make it clear that it's in Denmark, it's really, really easy to start a company. It can be done for 1 kroner, less than $1, and then you're practically starting it up. It's super easy, and we, through the kids, also learn them that, wow, can you live off making games? Yes, sure you can, and it's actually fairly easy to do so.
So from there, basically we said, well, now we have a little bit of money from the first jobs we did, so we took a leap of faith, and this leap of faith basically led us to where we are today. So we are right now seated in our office space. I actually sit at this desk right over here and work. Usually there's a lot more people in here. But yeah, so we basically started working job to job and just taking the next thing we could do. And we kept asking ourselves, well, how are we going to change this? How are we going to progress from just being generalist IT guys to start working with actual game development? And we basically knew what we were doing and what we were great at doing, and we knew how we were doing it. But the problem was we had no idea of knowing why we did it. So we kind of reversed the thinking process and started considering, why do we do this? And we said, well, we know that we want to change the world with games, so can we figure out something that's going to help us achieve that? And from there, we started looking at the world kind of like this. I don't know if you want to give a shot of this or...
No, keep going.
Okay.
I'll comment on it.
So basically, this is a model that I got from another very famous game director called Yoko Taro. And basically, he's saying that most of the potential within games is the stuff that we hear, like the Fortnites and the Battlefields and all of these things. That's the circle in the middle. And then we have all of the black stuff around, which is the things that you simply possibly can't really do. Stuff like playing a game and landing on the moon. That's not really possible at this point in time. But then we have a huge border of the unknown. And it seems like a lot of game developers tend to be focused on, well, I just want to make a game that's close to everything else. So we said, what about just going in the outer rim and just trying to figure out how diverse can we actually get with just doing something that's different? So yeah,
that's a huge part of Fenrir Games Studios. Always ask why and just try to do something else. It's okay to fail. Maybe it fails, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's a huge success. Just do something different. Don't be scared of going into the unknown.
So what you can say about our model is that we constantly challenge the status quo to find new ways to either develop or use new technology in another way. So we tend to be very innovative in terms of how we think about solutions. And this is basically what drives our business. The constant option to say, why do what everybody else is doing? Why not try something new? So I just listed a couple of different points here that I want to kind of bring to you, just to kind of get an idea of what we're doing. So it could be, for instance, what if dying in a game was progression? Dying in a game is something that we're very familiar with, and whenever you die in a game, you have to start over and play something else, or play the same thing again and again and again. So how about turning that into a progression mechanic? It's stuff like this, making sure that whenever the player dies, he feels like it was actually a reward in a sense. So this is kind of the stuff that we do. We challenge the regular way of viewing these things. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Lars is saying is completely right, and also feel free to look into other technologies that might not be connected to games at the moment. We have looked a lot into different hardware. Also, how about a gyroscope in a smartphone? Could that be used for gaming? They're developing new batteries. Could that do something to gaming? So also look out into other interests, and don't be afraid to ask, hey, could we go in that direction or that direction with that? It's there are endless possibilities. You just have to look for them.
Yeah. So of course, this is all good and well, but you also need to know how to apply it. So obviously, the most easy answer to give is just brainstorm it. But the thing is, if you just brainstorm it, you'll come up with a lot of different things, and you're not really sure how to connect them. So what we try to do is we take an example and we say, so why does it work like this? How can we take that and flip it on its head?
Yeah.
And basically, that's how we approach everything, even from our own solutions where we handled a problem and we don't really know how to handle that specific problem. We try to say, okay, could we try to change it up and look at it from a different angle? So we are very focused on this thing about having a reason for why we design stuff the way we do. Also, as Pirate said before, dare to explore uncharted territory. Always look for new ways to do things, because in a business as dynamic as the games development industry, you have to be on top of every new possible option that's out there. Of course, it can be hard if you are long in a production, but that's how it goes. You just have to figure out something new and take the bet. Yeah. Then, of course, most of you have probably heard about kill your darlings. This is very important. We've had a lot of problems with projects that kind of just ran on, and we ended up going back and saying, okay, now we just need to kill it, and we need to be realistic. Are we going to get anywhere working on this? And then we just said, no, okay, great, progress, something new.
Yeah, we're using a system where we actually have a freezer and then a deep freezer. So we also kill darlings, but if you're too afraid to kill darlings, you can also feel free to freeze them up and say, okay, I'll come back to this. Maybe I'll hear someone say something that could drive it forward, or maybe I just need a break from it and figure something out new. So we have a ton of old projects just laying around that we will pick up again sometime, because maybe there will be a time and place for them. But please don't be afraid to put them away.
Yeah. Cool. So we already touched a bit upon it. Try designing in reverse. Always start with what's important. What do you want to achieve with that specific product? And this is something that can be very hard when you start out designing. But this is just super important, because if you start with just a cool idea, you'll end up figuring out that it's not really adaptable to what you want to tell with that specific product or what you want to achieve. That can be a huge waste of time and a huge waste of resources. And then the last thing, of course, is focus on takeaways, and then take those things that you want your player or your user to take away, and then just design around those. So in that regard, we have like this specific term that we've been throwing a bit around. It's called a mechanics sandwich, which is basically just figuring out a specific game mechanic and then just layering a lot of mechanics on top. And nothing really helps in regards to anything. It's just one big pile of a lot of things and a lot of systems, and it can kind of separate the player's attention on a lot of different aspects, and it makes the whole experience very clunky and very hard to manage. So what we usually do is we kind of create this mechanics symbiosis instead, which is about starting with something. For instance, in this specific model, it's starting with the sensation of exploration, and then figuring out a lot of different systems and how these systems can work together to enhance that specific feeling or sensation.
Yeah, you'll experience this a lot when you're teaching, especially kids in game development. They're making a driving game, a car game, or whatever, and suddenly I think I need a volcano. Why? I don't know. Seems cool. Should explode. Why?
Yeah.
So you really start to think about that. Like, why are we doing this? I don't know. Cool.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to step back from that.
Definitely. And this is also why we are so focused on the why. Because the difference in design for us always lies in the why. You can create a lot of systems that sounds really cool, or a lot of good ideas, but the thing is, if you don't focus on what the takeaway or what they should enhance, or as I said earlier, what the takeaway should be, then you'll just have this mechanic sandwich rather than some symbiosis where they will work together to achieve something specifically. So our model in regards to all of this we came up with this term that we call insightful gamification. Now, insightful gamification is kind of a broad thing, and this is basically just a way that we handle specific projects that we get on board. So we said we can't compete with Triple A companies. That's insane because they have way more budget, way more people, more experience, and it's easier for them to reach a broader audience. So we said, what can we do that's different from everybody else? So we have a lot of experience working with data, and we have a lot of experience working with customizable systems. So we said, well, how about just focusing on either the customers or the users, and maybe we can kind of figure out a product that can satisfy both of them. So insightful gamification is basically about appealing to the customers. That means our customers. So our customers will then get some sort of statistical analysis or recommendations or real-time data or some sort of value that they can that basically describes their users, like what are their customers doing and how is their behavior recorded. This is of course the back end of it. The front end of it is that we are basically releasing apps, and these apps are then published out to users. They're free to get for everybody because our customers will pay for them. So when a user downloads this product, it's supposed to feel like they got something rather than they should feel like they're missing something if they go to one of our customers and they are not in possession of this specific topic or app or whatever we now develop. So what we end up doing is usually that the users have some sort of experience, like for instance, a treasure hunt or something that could be using augmented reality or virtual reality or any sort of technology that you can imagine. Then we design systems around that makes it fun to play that specific scenario. But then what we do is that we make sure that the data that they're gathering, the users, we can take that data and then we can put that back into the statistical analysis and tell our customers, hey, listen up, you have so and so many users doing this specific thing, and you can enhance your business by doing, I don't know, some sort of recommendation. So this is basically the way that we handle our production.
Yeah, absolutely. And all this is in mind, still games, using games to achieve all of this. And people are often getting blown away by, wow, can we use games for that? Yeah. So again, feel free to go into the unknown. We have targeted museums, theme parks, grocery stores, detail. So the market is actually pretty broad for this.
Definitely. And with that being said, I think that's the end of our presentation. So I'll just click here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pirate and Light. I'm magically resurfacing here. No, thanks for sharing your insights. And of course, one of the first questions we got in was certainly, Pirate, is it your legal name?
Pirate is my legal name, yes. In Denmark, you can actually have a lot of names and get a lot approved. So yeah, Pirate is my legal name.
But Light is also your legal name, or?
No, that's actually just a nickname. I don't really dare change it because my family has like a weapon shield and all those kind of things. So I'm slightly worried about that.
No, okay, yeah. I see. But I also have a burning question. What does Fenrir stand for? Not being indigenous to the Nordics, I'm from Central Europe, so.
So Fenrir is basically a mythological creature from the Nordic mythology. So it's the Fenrir wolf, which is I'm really bad with the lore and all of that, but I believe it's supposed to appear at Ragnarok, and then it breaks its chains or something. So it's a metaphor for being unleashed and being basically on the border of something new, like a change. And that's kind of what I feel like this company is doing. So that's why we chose that name.
No, okay, I see. Why games?
So the reason why we chose games is because I spent a lot of time thinking about how can you best possibly change the world, and hopefully for the better. So what we can do with games is that we can get under the skin of people. If you watch a movie or if you read a book or listen to a song, all of these is just one specific surface that you're touching. You're more or less just getting one sense of stimuli. The thing is, with games, you can kind of change that because you have the interactivity. And I believe that if you can have people do something, you can kind of work that in under their skin. And then if you expose them to certain situations, you can change their behavior. And that means that you can actually create better behavior for specific people who might have, let's say, problems with being social or something like that. You can kind of help them get to a point where it changes them and they feel like maybe being social is not as bad as it possibly could be. And that's why games is so different, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think it's cool, and Light really got to me with his games ideas, and games is a fresh media, still pretty new media, so I'm really excited to see where this can go with this new media we got here.
Yeah, okay.
I think the possibilities are limitless right now.
Yeah. So where do you actually see the future of augmented reality, virtual reality?
Yes, personally, I think virtual reality would be, in my opinion, great for certain tools, like the tools for training or stuff like that. I think AR or augmented reality will blow up, absolutely blow up. It has a lot of possibilities for gaming and for workspaces and stuff like that. So I think it will be huge, but it's even newer than games, so we still have to see where this can go.
Yeah.
I think I just recently was at a presentation by the University of Aalborg as well, and I think they're really working very intensively with augmented reality. Are you still collaborating with them as well?
Yeah, we have a bit of connections there, so we go there from time to time. And we usually get a lot of contacts with their students and so on. So one of the things that's really interesting about Aalborg University in particular is that it's not really a typical line of study where you just study a specific topic, but you're kind of like choosing what you want to study. And that means that you can say, I really want to be an expert in virtual reality, and then you can just start doing that. So some of our leading experts in virtual reality have actually been educated from Aalborg University. So it's a very specific it's a special way of studying, I would say. And in regards to all this about virtual reality and augmented reality, I completely agree with Pirate on the virtual reality as a training tool. But it's also a matter of figuring out specifically what we can use it for, because right now it's still very limited. So it's going to change in the future, but where it goes, it's hard to say.
Yeah. What are the target groups for your projects? One of the audience members would like to know.
Yeah, that's more on your field, I suppose.
Yeah, if we're talking in regards of what we do with insightful gamification, we are also still figuring out where we want to go with this. But for now, it's for us, it's business to business. So it's museums and it's theme parks and stuff like that we're targeting right now. But we are looking into expansion into other fields.
Yeah.
But it is about, mostly right now, it's about finding places that have customers, and we want to give those customers or their users a super special experience. So where it fits, it will go.
One of the ideas and one of the things that we've been talking about for quite some time is getting someone like H&M on board, even though they're selling clothing. But the thing is that they have so many people around buying their products. So there's no reason for us not to go in there and help them. Because what we can do with our specific approach to things is that we can, for instance, tell them something about how much they actually spend on production for specific pieces of clothing in different parts of the world that might actually not be what they what their audience wants to get, and then we can, on the other side, give the customer a little bit of discount, and in the end, both of them will save money. So it's a win-win situation as we see it. So that's basically how we look at targets.
We're trying. It's about getting to know your customers, right?
Yeah.
It's more like what their name, where they do live, how many children do they have. That's cool, but we already got a lot of tools for figuring that out. I want to see what do people actually want. So that's the path we're heading down right now.
Super.
Yeah.
Well, Pirate Light, thank you very much. We'll meet you again later in the discussion round. And I think you'll be happy to leave the little room for a little while because it's getting quite hot in here. But I'll hand over to Stefan de Mirtjan from Supercell. And yeah, we look forward to your presentation. And to talk about what Finland has to offer, and of course about the success story your company has experienced so far.
Thank you for the kind introduction. So yeah, my name is Stefan de Mirtjan, and greetings from Finland in Helsinki, and welcome to my presentation of why culture and long-term thinking matters, in our opinion at least. Before we get really started, just a little bit about myself. So after my WU Wien studies in economics, I came in 2008 to Finland. And after a couple of stints in other industries, I actually joined the video games industry, because back in the time, I wanted to do something in my life that I really felt passionate for, and games were always a passion of mine. And it was also the right timing, because back then a new form of business model and game type was on the rise, which was the so-called free-to-play movement, or free-to-play games that originated back then on Facebook, if you remember those days, and the endless invites and all that stuff that was happening back in those days. So I was part of that since I was working on Facebook games back in Digital Chocolate. And I was very lucky and blessed to be given the opportunity to join 2012 Supercell. And I've been the game lead of the game called Heyday ever since. And as you can see, if you compare this with the photo there, 6 years of game development had an effect on my hair growth. So in terms of Supercell, so we are very, very lucky to have 4 very successful games, which maybe you have heard of, maybe not. The most known games are certainly of the Clash brand, so Clash of Clans and Clash Royale. But the 2 other games, also Boom Beach and Heyday, are highly successful games. And as I said, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about my background in Heyday today, since I've been a game lead of that project for almost 6 years now. So just to quickly summarize and manage expectations, what I will be covering today. So a quick intro to Heyday, and then I will spend most of my time with how we do things around here, especially from a culture point of view, and how our culture affects also long-term thinking. And then for hopefully some actual game developers that are watching here today, I want to actually cover a very specific Heyday case study, which I hope will be quite interesting to see. So quickly, in short, what is Heyday? Heyday is a game where you build up and decorate your own farm. It's a game where you trade with a global audience. It's a game where you also play with your friends. And it's a game that we humbly call the most successful farming game on mobile and tablets. And basically, Heyday was launched back in, when was it, June 2012, right before Midsummer Night here in Finland. And we were very lucky in being able to reach a global audience ever since, mainly speaking, the number 1 spot in 127 markets. And so we've been very, very lucky and very humble about this as well. And Heyday is still going very strong, even after 6 years at this point. And once you have a very successful game, all kinds of fun things and exciting things can happen from a community point of view. Suddenly, you're doing wedding, marriage proposals within the game. This was an example that I personally did, which was very fun to do with the community. And this was only one of them. We had several over the years. But also from a marketing point of view, as soon as you have a very successful game, you can do a lot of stuff on that front. And in here, you see a photo of the commercial shoot of our global campaign a couple of years back, which also ran in Austria, I believe. It was a so-called Cabo campaign with the American actor / comedian Craig Robinson. Really cool spot. Unfortunately, we had to take it down from YouTube due to copyrights, but I think you can still find it in the internet somewhere. But not only globally, but also locally, you can also do a lot of stuff. This was our Japan marketing effort back then, where in Tokyo we decorated an entire subway with Heyday assets, which proved to be very successful for us and also very engaging for the player base. I could be talking more about this, but I would like to actually switch over now to the heart of this presentation in how we do things around here. A quick note to how the organization is built, meaning that games are a creative industry, right? So you would think that within this environment, the company structures would also allow for those creative people to express themselves freely without any fear of being overruled all the time, or that someone jumps in and takes control. And the reality in my mind is, in our opinion, is that most of the companies that we're aware of are following actually this traditional model, meaning that someone at the top has a creative vision and everybody else executes based on that vision. So our founders at Supercell decided that, based on their own experience in this traditional model, that they wanted to shake things up. So they actually turned the entire system upside down. Why did they do this? Because they wanted to allow the creative people to be as close as possible to the consumer, in this case, the players. And what this means is that in our scenario, the game teams, also called as cells, derivating from the name Supercell, are the people that actually handle the games by themselves, individually and on their own accord. Meaning, game teams at Supercell have the ability and the liberty to make their own decisions as they see fit. And everybody else down the organizational structure, in this case, is there to support them, to take basically basically allow them to do their work, removing obstacles, so to say. So what this in reality means is that we in the Heyday team are completely independent by making our own decisions, but at the same time, we're also equally responsible of our own fate. So in one word or the other, you could actually see game teams in Supercell as mini companies within a much bigger company. And what applicants always ask me whenever I do interviews is that, is it really true that our CEO or the leadership team or anyone else never steps in and tells us what to do? And that's the absolute truth, because that's the foundation, the principle of this company, that unlike other companies that I also worked in, the CEO does not come in and tells the game team what to do. Now, as a disclaimer, of course, despite the independence, there's also the responsibility, which are two elements of our company culture. And here is the important part to mention, that of course we're not working in a silo. We interact with each other properly. We exchange learnings, which is another aspect of our company culture. And we also together make sure that we reach a qualitative standard that we're all happy with. This entire system is basically built on trust. Trust by the game teams that no one else steps in and tells them what to do, overrules their own decision, and trust by the company, the leadership team, that they have hired the right people that are able to make those sometimes extremely tough decisions on their own and always have the greater good of the company in mind. So a common saying around here is the company comes first, then the team, and then the individual. Then I want to briefly talk about how game teams look like at Supercell. Most likely this won't differ too much from other developers. So whenever a new game is launched or started, it's just a couple of guys or girls coming together. In most cases, the maximum number is 4 people. Sometimes it's only 2, sometimes it's 3. But you always need to have at least 1 artist and 1 programmer. And sometimes there's also a game lead present, sometimes not. Speaking of the game leads, which is also my title, I have to honestly say that those game lead titles are not important at all at Supercell. We are basically just the spokespeople for our teams, and we also make sure that certain things just keep moving forward, and we make sure decisions are made. There is also no set rules of who can be a game lead at Supercell. Basically, the doors are open to anyone. And that also allows game leads to have a very varied background. There can be a business background like myself. There can be also artists, programmer, or even data scientists, and so on background. So it's a very open structure that we have here. So this would be basically the prototyping phase. Once your game is in a good enough shape to leave the prototype state and is gaining traction internally, we start staffing those teams up. And it means that we just add more resources, mostly programmers and artists, but also testers, to make sure that the game is progressing properly and in good speed. And this always comes with some difficult discussions, since we as a company want to stay small. We're roughly 250 people. We're not thousands of people given the success of a company. So we're really, really small given that magnitude. So yeah, it's always a difficult decision to staff, because resources are finite, and we also want to stay small. But at the end of the day, everybody wants to do what's best for the company. So always fun to have those discussions when the time arises, when a new game is ready. And once you're lucky enough to actually have a great game in a live environment, then you start staffing up further, and you especially start adding functions such as a data scientist who checks basically the numbers behind the game, but also the community is integrated much stronger into the game team by adding the community lead, but also the player support lead who handles the direct day-to-day communication in terms of tickets into the team. So we can basically, so we have all the tools available to make the best decisions possible, to be able to make the decisions independently within the resources that we have in the team. So in closing, I want to say that at Supercell, we don't believe that the best pitch or the best idea of a game makes the best game. We believe that it's the execution that matters, since ideas are cheap. So based on that, it's not the idea, but it's the best people that make the best games, in our humble opinion. And going back to Heyday, so the Heyday team looks exactly like this. At this point, we're roughly 13 people, which allows us again to reference the independence with shared responsibility to create a game as a service. What is a game as a service? It's a game that means to make decisions that fully support this goal, which is to create games that people play for years to come. This can be also rephrased in, let's say, business terms, and the business term here would be so-called retention. What is retention? Retention is basically the measurement of how often your players come back to your game. There are all kinds of ways to measure it. You can measure day-to-day retention, following day retention, D1, D7, D30, etc. Long story short, it's just a measurement to tell you how healthy is your game from a point of view where if the players are coming back regularly to your game. And in our case, to follow this guideline, it means that we need to listen to the community. We need to also check what the data says at the same time. But we also have to discuss as a team to make the best decisions possible to bring our game to the next level. What this means in concrete steps is that we improve things like all the features, we add content constantly, and we also create sometimes completely new features that have the purpose of reinvigorating the game to, and all of this to achieve that one goal as best as possible. I want to briefly talk about also monetization. Now, when I said that retention is the #1 metric here at Supercell, I absolutely mean that. But of course, it's not always unicorns and rainbows, because it's also business that you have to think about. So there's also, you need to also spend some time to think about monetization. And basically, in a holistic way, all games on any platform have to think about, have to make actually decisions on how to raise revenue, right? Otherwise, you don't have a company, you don't have a project at all. So whether if it's a physical disc or that you buy in a store, or it's a downloadable content with regular subscriptions, or even a free game that relies on ads or in-app purchases such as Heyday. At the end of the day, the key is to design a great fun game first before you add monetization on top. So basically not the other way around, because in our humble opinion, we have never seen a great example that where someone designed a monetization strategy, added a game on top of that layer, and then had a long-term success. Short-term, sure, but long-term, not that we have seen. So that brings me, after the monetization talk, to this specific case study that I would still like to cover today before it's my time to close this presentation. And it has to do with monetization and how it ties into our culture. So what you see here is that, let's start with the image at the bottom. This is a good reference that shows you how Heyday monetizes to a certain degree. So you have a pumpkin in this example that you put on your farm. This pumpkin will take now roughly 3 hours until it's ready, so you can complete it and then use it further down the line in the product chain. So if you cannot wait or don't want to wait, there is this lightning bolt button that you can press, and in that scenario you would spend 6 diamonds and you would instantly complete this pumpkin. Those 6 diamonds are representing the premium currency in Heyday. What is a premium currency? In most free-to-play games, there's soft currency and there's premium currency. Soft currency is something that players can earn in rich abundance throughout the game core loop. Basically, core loop means anything that you do over and over again, which is always the essence of a game. And the premium currency is currency that you can earn in the game, but to a large degree, in most cases have to actually buy with real money. So in this case, the problem here was that the original game team that launched the game never had time to implement like a confirmation step here. And this resulted in the fact that many players by accident pressed this button and spent their premium currency by accident. So this was obviously nothing that anyone was happy with. And the reason why it was just like that in the game was that no one had time to think about it when the game was launched, because it's very, very stressful to think of millions of things when you launch a game. And this was sadly one of the things that fell through the cracks. So it was upon us to actually fix this, and we were determined as a team to fix it. But at the same time, it was also important to approach this also from a sensible business point of view. So what we did was that we did a so-called A/B test. What is an A/B test? An A/B test is basically something where you show a fraction of the player base experience A and another fraction of the player base experience B. In reality, we're not talking about A/B tests, we're talking about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on tests. So there are a lot of treatments that most of the time can be tested, are tested. And as a disclaimer, we at Supercell are actually very careful with doing A/B tests, especially the other games that are having a so-called PVP component, meaning player versus player. They never do A/B tests because you can't really have a good experience at all if you give in a game where you have to fight other players' potential advantages. In Heyday, it's a little bit different, but even in Heyday, we're super careful with doing those tests, and we rarely do them. But this was one of those few cases where we simply had to do one because we had to approach it from a direction as well. So what you see here is then we added basically a double confirmation step. And the treatments that we tested here was that in the first option, we added basically a blue flag that popped up as soon as you press the button once. At the same time, we also added like a floating text that said, tap again to confirm, just to explain to players what is exactly happening here. The second treatment was that we actually removed the text and just left the flag. And that shows you how granular the details can be if you test things like that, because anything can make a difference. And if you don't test it properly, you will never know what the decision maker was. The third option was that we removed the flag entirely. And after the first step, the button just started glowing, like pulsating up, bigger, smaller, bigger and smaller. So like a pulsating animation. And the last one was a little bit more creative, where we thought, let's test a version where you actually have to hold down the button until that bar, the blue bar that you see, was filled up. And once it was filled up, then you would spend the premium currency. So what was the result of this? So after 2 months of testing, those were the results. And basically the sad truth here was, or the sobering truth was, that every single solution had a negative impact on daily revenue. And you can see the percentages on the screen. So this became a defining moment for us, for our culture, because it's easy to say one thing, that we always have to, we're thinking long term, we want to do what's right, and it's an entirely different thing to actually really do it once those difficult situations arise. And I still remember that I was a little bit worried when we as a team had made this decision, and I had to approach our company with a bigger decision, and also the leadership team, to explain them why we're doing this. And turns out I was worrying for nothing, because at the end of the day, the entire company and the leadership team was fully on board with us, because at the end of the day, they understood as well as we did that you need to have a healthy game before you can build basically a business on top of that. And if you don't have players that are happy with your game, that like to play it, and through that happiness sometimes choose to maybe spend a little money on top of that, you don't have a business or game at hand at all. So basically what this case, which originated in Haiti, proved to us as a company was that we were indeed willing to do what's right, even if it meant, so what's right for the long term, even if it's meant, if it offers like substantial negative short-term effects. And I'm saying short-term here because once you accept those, you still have a healthy game in the best case scenario, and then you can still think about additional options with new features, for example, or new content where you can maybe take those losses back if possible. So in closing, I just want to say that creating games, and especially maintaining games with the current market, is extremely, extremely hard. Especially games that people play for years to come, which is basically our goal here at Supercell. And what is also important to note is that 6 years ago, when we launched Heyday, the market was vastly different. Back then, players were still looking for great games to play. Nowadays, they already are playing great games to play because there are so many of them flooding the market. It's a real red ocean here, red ocean meaning that there's a lot of competition here. So I believe there are like over 1,000 games released on the app stores weekly, or was it even daily? I don't remember, but a crazy number. So the competition that you have to face as a new game company, but even as an old game company, is incredibly fierce and difficult. So because of this, it is, I believe, or we believe that if you have the right company culture with the right mentality that fuels long-term thinking and the ability to accept short-term losses, it will allow you to navigate those really difficult waters in today's markets easier. It will at least give you the tools to handle those situations more efficiently than without them, in our humble opinion. And there's also one thing that, for example, I did not foresee back then when we made this difficult decision, and that was the fact that a couple of weeks, or I don't know when it was, sometime after we triggered the switch, which was that we chose actually the option with the smallest amount of negative financial impact, so out of the A/B test. I don't know if I said that actually. One interesting thing was that the player support team approached me and said that what we did was amazing, because player support tickets decreased by -70% in the upcoming days and weeks and years going forward. And that alone had a huge monetary value also to us as a company. So even though Heyday as a team took a hit, we as the company benefited nonetheless, because we helped another team to succeed with their own numbers. So I believe that was everything that I had to say for today. The last thing I want to say is that Supercell is always looking for proactive doers that have passion for excellence and consider themselves a good person as well. So by that I mean they are respectful, humble, and genuine. So please check out our career pages. If you're a developer or have any other skills, check it out. It would be great if we can work together. And other than that, thank you very much for your attention today. And I believe it's QA time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stefan, for this wonderful presentation. We've collected a few questions on the way, and we have a couple of minutes before we move on to Laura. So first question that came in was, I would like to know how you or your team chooses the topics for creating your games.
So this question can be answered from two different ways. So let's start from, if it's a new game where you start from scratch, then games at Supercell actually built such that passionate people actually come together. So we don't have, so I have to explain something what happens in traditional meeting, what happened, and what happened in my past company. In my past company, when I was working on my past project, and I was also part of a new game project, we actually had to go through a so-called green light meeting. That meant that we had to prepare, me and the producer back at the time, had to prepare a material to explain properly and in business terms what kind of a game we want to do, and also what the financial impact for the company could be. So we had to do a lot of like estimates that, to be honest, were a complete waste of time at the time, in order to get through, to survive those pitch meetings, so to say. At Supercell, we don't have those at all. So creative people find themselves, for example, a passionate programmer, or let's say a passionate artist, or even game designer, and they say, this could be interesting. And most of the time, they find some time next to their work to create something, either on paper or as a board game, or even in writing. And then they try together to try to get other people excited in the company. And that's basically how teams are formed at Supercell. It happens organically. So we don't have a process where, I don't know, leadership team or game leads come together and say, this is the game we need to do. It happens organically. Sure, sometimes we sometimes feel very passionate about the game idea, but then it just depends if you can find passionate people for it. But overall, I have to say that it happens organically. And if the question was more directed from a live team perspective, which I'm currently working in, what I always tell people when they join my team is that I always want to have like proactive people that are also willing to challenge me. Because every single team member in a small team that handles a game for millions is vital. Everybody wears several hats. With 15 people handling all of that is quite a lot of a burden, or can be sometimes. To answer the question, design decisions are always made together as a team. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to achieve 100% agreement with everything, but we absolutely make sure that everybody's voice is heard, everybody's opinion is respected. Sometimes we have a unanimous agreement, sometimes we don't. Hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, I hope so. Otherwise, we'll get another question from the audience soon again, I would think. Well, thank you, Stefan. Out of time considerations, we have to move on, but there is one question which I think you will be able to answer quickly. When does Brawl Stars come to Austria?
The team is working hard. Unfortunately, I can't say much about that because they will announce something when there is something to announce. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. We will see you later in the bigger question and answer session around 2:15 or 2:20. And then moving on to Sweden and Laura Pulaka. I do apologize because before I did not actually introduce you properly. I missed out on your last name. But here we go. Laura Pulaka from Valiant Game Studio in Sweden. And Laura, you are a game developer dragon that wears very many hats. You are the mastermind behind the optimistic strategy of Hard Paper's Borders. You are co-founder of Valiant Game Studio, and you're also an organizer of the Sweden Game Conference. And we very much look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here and listening to the other presentations, which have been fantastic. I realized that I should have added an introductory slide myself, but I'm going to use this one and tell you a little bit about myself and why my title is Professional Dragon. And that is because here I am in Sweden now, and I'm supposed to talk about the Swedish market, but I'm actually Romanian. My experience in the video games industry started in the year 2000, which was a very interesting year in general for the world, but especially for Romania. And in the year 2000, I started to write about games. So I was a video games journalist. And I did that for a very long time. And sometimes during that part of my career, I started to become very, very interested about how games are made. So I wrote very long series of features called Making Of, and I started to have interviews with studios from all over the world. And I wrote that column for something like 11 years every month. And it was both, insights about what it means to be a game developer, but also a lot of interviews with very important studios like Blizzard or to deploy. And somewhere down the line, I was interviewing a studio, and they actually asked me, why don't I make games myself, because I'm so interested in the field and I'm so passionate about it. And that's when I kind of stood out and thought about the idea of making games. And at that time, it was around 2009, and it was a very different time, especially in the Eastern Europe, with the idea of becoming a game developer, because no one was a game developer, and there was no support, no schools, no funding, nothing, basically to become a game developer. But there was a few companies in Romania, and I decided to take the chance, and so I became a game developer, and I started to work for FunLabs, which was a company delivering games for Activision. So I worked a lot with Activision in 2009. And then I decided that I want to move away from Romania and get more international experience. So I moved to Italy, and there I was game director and senior producer for the biggest Italian game studio, actually, Milestone, making racing games. And in all that time, I was looking a lot to Sweden and comparing a lot what it means to make games in Romania and what it means to make games in Italy and what it means to make games in Sweden. And around the time when I actually started to think seriously to move professionally in Sweden, there was this project called Minecraft. And that was kind of symbolic for me, because I was also playing a lot of Minecraft. And I wanted to be in a place that enables those kind of games to be born. So in 2010, I moved to Sweden, and I began working again in racing for a company called Simbin. And there's a lot of talk about being a professional game developer and not an entrepreneur, but just an employee. And they say that you're not really a game developer until you get laid off once. I disagree with that. I think that says a lot about the industry, and that's a very wide subject that I'm not going to touch so much today. But Simbin went bankrupt about 3 years after I moved to Sweden, which was actually very good for me, because then I moved to a small city called Hovde, which has a very, very big game development support program, and it has a game development university. And to keep the students who study about game development in Hovde, it also has an incubator. So you can start your studio, and you get a lot of support from the Swedish state, actually, to you get offices, and you get hardware and a lot of support to start this stream. And Hovde actually gave birth to some games some of you might know, like Goat Simulator and like Stanlock Studios, which is another big studio from Hovde. So that was a very interesting field to be in. And when I moved to Hovde, I started to work as a production coach for all the studios in our incubator. And then we also started to build a very nice project called Sweden Game Arena, which encompasses the hub of game development in Sweden. And we also, besides organizing the Swedish presence, to international events like GDC, Nordic Game, or Gamescom, we also have a conference, and I will talk a little bit more about that. Anyhow, so I have a lot of experience with the Swedish games industry in general, and with the studios in the Swedish games industry in general. But time has passed, and I decided that I want to go back to production. And that's why last year I moved to Stockholm, and I joined a friend of mine, Anna, to found a studio called Valiant Game Studio. And the reason Anna and I wanted to start this studio is because we also believe that games can change the world. And we also believe that the market continuously shifts and expands and changes. So it's very hard to give good advice on what you need to do to succeed as building a game studio. But that's also good news, because in a red ocean, which means an overcrowded market. There's a lot of competition, a lot of games. It's very hard to be visible, but it also leaves room to explore what games aren't telling right now and what games could be but aren't right now. And we want to make precisely those kind of games that aren't that much of a focus right now. We started Valiant Game Studio in 2017. Valiant means courageous, and this is what we also want to be, courageous, because we want to make games who are not so focused on competition and they're not so focused on violence, for example, but instead we want to get inspiration from the real world and to use games to talk about quite important subjects like, you know, prejudice, racism, economical inequality, and stuff like that. But in a very fun way. In 2017, at the end of 2017, Anna and I got together. We got a very good friend and wonderful artist, Eva, and we are still a team of 3. And we, after a lot of iterations, we decided that we want to bring the TV series to video games, meaning that we want to focus on shorter experiences that tell, you know, relevant, important stories, and kind of like TV series do. So we are making episodic games. And that's when our first project started. It's called Pendula Swing. And Pendula Swing, I will tell you about that in the next slide. Anyhow, we are funded by private investment. We are part of the Sting Incubator, which is the Swedish games-oriented incubator in Stockholm. And we are also part of Sweden Game Arena, my previous project, and I will also explain to you a little bit what this means as well. So Pendula Swing is, our tagline is Tolkien meets the Great Gatsby, and it's a point-and-click, episodic point-and-click adventure game, which is very, very rich in narrative. We want to tell stories, and we want to tell controversial stories, but also fun stories about prejudice, racism, and inequality, inspired by the political situation and in general the situation that was happening in America in the 1920s. And that was the suffragette movement. It was a time when the cars became super popular, the Industrial Revolution became something, and it caused perhaps similar problems to what we're facing today, job loss and you know, poverty in general for some. And we want to talk about that, but we are using fantasy tropes to illustrate that kind of world. So that's the philosophical idea behind the game and the fun part of it. But we also talk a lot about business models and what we need to do to succeed, because no matter how idealistic you are, when you start to make games, and especially when you start to build a studio, you need to consider what you want to do, what's the value for you, the creative value, but you also need to survive, basically. And that means making money. That's why we took the decision to make an episodic game, among other things. And the reason is that right now the games market is quite changing rapidly. I personally think that's a great thing. But when you, for example, when you look at Steam, it used to be that you didn't have that many games to choose from on Steam. But right now, they opened up the market, kind of like Apple did with iOS, the iOS market. And now there's like 20,000 games on Steam, and 150 to 200 games are being released every week now, new games. So when you put a game on Steam, you compete not only with the new releases, which are quite many of them, but also with all the back catalog. So you're competing with Skyrim, for example, you're competing with Divine Divinity. You are competing with extremely big and nice and beautiful games, which are developed by teams who are much bigger than our team. So you need to find good ways to be sure that people learn about your game. And in our case, we decided to go episodic because we wanted to give the game to give an access to the game which is free. And so episode 1 is free for Pendula Swing. And starting from episode 2 to 7, you pay a little bit to unlock new areas to continue the story of the game. And this allows us, first and foremost, to give something for free. Secondly, to have constant opportunity to talk about our game, and because we're releasing episodes. And thirdly, to be extremely flexible when it comes to selling basically the game, because you can sell packs, you can sell all episodes bundles, so you can be creative when it comes to pricing. And we also think that we need to go beyond Steam, because the industry, the games industry, the way you play games changes dramatically, and we want to generate our titles for the mobile industry as well. Now, what it means to make games and what it means to make games specifically in Sweden. Valiant, we are part of Sting, and Sting is short for Stockholm Innovation and Growth, and it's again a state-funded organization. And we have been part of the Sting Game Incubator. And when you apply for an incubator, basically what happens is, if you get accepted, there's always an acceptance process. But if you get accepted as a new team, you can get access to office space, which is kind of important because you want to work together with your team. And sometimes that office space is for free. In our case, it was free for 6 months. You usually get coaching, and both in Stockholm and in Hovde, you get a personalized coach that helps you with a lot of details, like how do you set up a company, how do you set up your bookkeeping, how do you hire, how do you prepare a business plan, and all that stuff. Then there's also these incubators, and this network has a lot of useful workshops and networking events where you get opportunity to learn, of course, a lot, but you also make friends, which is actually very important in this industry. And you also get, for example, our biggest value from being in Sting was that we got the opportunity to meet a lot of investors and to learn how to talk to our investors, so actually pitching for investors. And I mentioned here Dataspelsbranschen as well. This is the Swedish games industry. They are also collaborating a lot with Sting and other parties around here to make sure that developers get to know the people they want to know, and that everything is transparent and it's clear what we need help with. When it comes to Sweden Game Arena, based in Hovde, being a part of Sweden Game Arena means that you have visibility and awareness, presence at international events, and a lot of contacts. And I can detail this a little bit. So when you start a game studio, you have to understand how you are going to make the games and how you are going to talk about those games. And part of generating visibility over yourself as a company and over your products, your games, is that you go to a lot of events. And going to events can be quite expensive. You have to travel to San Francisco, you go to Köln very often to Gamescom. And so what Sweden Game Arena does is assists us very much with these kind of things, which we otherwise wouldn't be able to do as a small 3-person studio. And there's also the visibility and awareness support. There's people who actually talk about us, which is, for example, them. And there's also a lot of networking and contacts that happens. Yep. And since I think I'm getting ready to finish my time, this is the last slide. So the conclusion is, if you want to start a studio, my first advice would be to consider getting some experience in the industry before you actually consider going on your own, because it's very, very important to learn how things work and how other successful companies do it. But then you have to have the courage to start and to actually trust your idea. And you need to make a good game. That is extremely true. And the most important thing is to make a good game and then apply, you know, how to make money out of it on top of that. Find your voice and the right people in the industry. This has to do a lot with the kind of team that you are building and, you know, the absolute awareness of knowing that everyone who is joining you wants to make games as much as you do. So in the industry, there is some companies do have a top-down attitude, and the CEO, for example, or the boss decides what needs to be done, but that almost always never really works. Because everyone is very creative, and not listening to them would mean actually turning down a lot of opportunity for making better games. So it's very important to find the right people that you can make games with and to fit together and envision working together for many, many years and to complement each other to become creative. Another advice is to have positive examples. So, for example, the whole Swedish games industry, I take that as a very positive example, thanks to a lot of success stories that there are, which kind of generated a catch-22 market, so to say. So, new companies become successful because there are so many positive examples and so many successes that we can draw from. But this generates more and more success. So basically, surround yourself with people that can give you good lessons, and also be in a very helpful environment. So in our case, being in Sweden, it means that we, for example, got free offices for 6 months, which is quite a help. It means we get coaching and networking, and getting to know a lot of people whom we otherwise it would be very hard for us to know, and to leverage the whole independent community in general, which is always very, very helpful. And yeah, that's kind of it. I hope this helped. I think that's it. Thank you.
Well, Laura, thank you very much. I'm trying to access the camera again. Here I am. Yeah, we'll do a brief Q&A with you, and then I'll ask everyone to join us again. But first, a few questions that were directed directly to you. One question was, because you mentioned pitching, what are investors looking for in a game studio like yours?
That's actually It's a very difficult subject to answer, because we've been a few weeks ago at an event called Investing Games, and we asked investors exactly this: what is it that you're searching for in a studio? And there is no clear answer. Most of them are most of them are basing themselves with their gut feeling, and that's exactly what they say. And they also, it's a lot of matter of luck. Basically from their perspective. So what this means is, like, I think every one of us can put ourselves in the idea of being an investor and just ask yourself, would you invest in yourself, and why? Like, do you like the game? Do you like the team? Do you trust that the team can deliver the game? Does the team have the skills? Does the team have examples of being able to deliver, and all that stuff? So all of these factors in picture that investors use their gut feeling to evaluate the value of that picture that you generate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And another question has come in was, so what has been the trigger point for Sweden, because we're talking a lot about the framework, for moving to the next level? Is it the attention from the public sphere, the respective support? Is it capital that's available here? Is it close collaboration of companies, of the ecosystem?
I can give an example in Hovde and what happened in Hovde. So I think that there is a university. It's called the University of Hovde, and around 98 2000, they were focused on, for example, offering studies, IT studies. But around that time, what happened is that there was an IT bubble. So people kind of got scared of forging a career in IT. And the university was very quick to react, and they were one of the first, I think, in Europe who said, you know what, IT bubble is a problem, so we need to diversify, and that's when they started to offer game development courses. And the problem was that you could study game development, but then if you wanted to continue, forging a career in that domain, you kind of had to go out of Skopje and go work for Ubisoft or, DICE or stuff like that, and go to Stockholm or Gothenburg or Malmo, which is, again, a lot of people in Skopje were forward thinking, and they thought, okay, we need to complement the studies that we're offering by opening an incubator and by giving the support to the students to start a company if they want to. And that was really, really nice. And some of the first companies that started in the incubator were, for example, Coffee Stain, who then did Code Simulator and went to become worldwide successes. Then there was Stanlock, who did Battlewrite, and it kind of grew from there. And it also generated a very, very close community, because in a small city like I hope that everyone knows everyone, and if you go have a coffee, the chances of hearing people talking about games or game development are like 90% or something. So once the first team started to be successful, they really acted very quickly and thought about how to help the other teams become successful. And so that's how success builds success and helped one another. But I think this whole attitude of helping and of friendliness is very clear and very obvious in games industry in general, and especially in the independent games industry for small studios. So you just need to, I don't know, be on Twitter, read the news, see what's happening, and just talk to people, ask people for help, and they will help you. Like, people is extremely friendly and extremely helpful. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Laura. And you see me nodding. That's because Light is actually nodding just behind the camera here. So I will take the opportunity and ask both Pirate and Light back onto their seats here. I will move over and ask Stefan also to join us for a couple of minutes of general question and answers and discussions. Actually, the questions have been pouring in, and I'm afraid that we will probably not be able to answer all of them. But I will pick some which would probably all of you can comment on. So a general question that came in was, how important is it to build a community for a game before you launch it? So maybe, Laura, if we start with you.
It's very important, but it's also very hard to do. And building a community means that you just get the courage to talk about your game, even when you just have an idea and a few, drawings on paper, and just see how people react to it. Yeah, it's extremely important and very, very hard.
Thank you. Pirate, Light, any comments?
Yeah, so obviously we are in a bit of a different scenario. So for us, it's not as important to build the community for our games, most of them, because they are made in relationship with other companies. And the advantage is that since people, they feel like they get something from the game, it's just a benefit for them. But one thing that I have learned is that something you can do in order to build a community around your game is that you can use Discord servers and then just offer people free stuff. And it doesn't have to be like a lot of stuff. It can be maybe just a recoloring of something, because it's just the value of having that. Well, I did this thing. I was one of the first ones to support this game. It can help a huge bunch for your game and create a lot of hype.
Thank you. Stefan, do you have anything to add?
It's actually quite important, but it's funny because I believe because Supercell is so lucky to be in the situation that we're in, we have to tackle this from a different perspective, meaning that whenever we test a new game, so most of the times we do what most of the industry is also doing. If you have a new game within the free-to-play mobile world, you decide to test it maybe in a country of your choice, let's say Canada or any country that you think can represent the global audience as best as possible. And what I meant by that Supercell is in a slightly unique position, because we're so lucky, was that as soon as we put a new game for testing reasons in that market, word gets out, and then too many people from other markets with a VPN client get that game as well, even though it was never intended to blow up like that. So we actually, for us, it's the other way around. We try to keep it as small as possible because of the global reach that our company has, that we don't want to make it too big, because if we have to kill it, which happens more often than it survives, it's going to be always a sad scenario for everybody involved. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Next question is about not about community, but about partnerships. Maybe we start with you, Stefan. Can you talk about beneficial partnerships or partnerships you go into that assist you to reach your game success today?
I think, sorry, you broke off for a second, but I think the question was what partners are beneficial for the success of our game. Is that correct?
Yeah, or do you enter beneficial partnerships actually for your game success? Yeah.
So in my role, I have to say that in most scenarios, if it's like external partners, like third-party solutions and whatever, in 99% of the cases, I just say no, so we can focus on the day-to-day work. But I would say that at least within our own industry, in the free-to-play mobile industry, I would have to say that having a good relationship with the app stores such as Apple, Google, and any other place where you put your game out is very crucial. Now, naturally, of course, that's a lot easier for successful companies, aka known companies or trusted companies, rather than for someone that just starts out in the garage with his best friend. So those are really difficult cases, but in our case, my answer would be that the most beneficial partners, connections are the ones to the store providers.
Thank you. Pirate Light, you already mentioned partnerships before, but maybe you would like to elaborate as well.
Yeah, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we also have partners, but as Stefan also says, it's all about connections and network in general. Partnerships comes in many forms, but it helps us to get insight into the latest research, for example, from AU, or hire to work if you have partners in that sector. So it helps us a lot to have both partners and connections.
Yeah, we are also partnering with a lot of other game studios. So basically, what we work kind of as like an extension to their production, or someone who can realize their potential that they can't really do themselves. So for us, we are in a very specific position where it's better for other people to know us because, well, we can kind of help them solve problems. So for us, it's having connections is more or less everything.
Okay. And Laura, if you would like to elaborate.
I agree that having connections is everything. And it depends what kind of partnership you mean. Sometimes it can be much more valuable to find a freelancer or an external resource that can help you with development, and you need to make the calculations. Sometimes you need to consider working with a company that helps you, talk about your game and spread awareness about your game. So it depends about the kind of partnerships that you want to leverage and what you want out of that partnership. I would ask the one who asked the question to provide a little bit more details, because it feels like maybe people want to ask about publishers, for example. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Laura. We'll do that for sure after the webinar. But since we're actually coming very close to the end, maybe a final question still to the round of you. What is the minimum amount of team members you need to create a new game nowadays? And what would be a good distribution of required skills? Maybe we'll start with Fenrir this time around.
Yeah, I would say one. It's very it's very offensive to say that like that, but I feel like nowadays it's so easy to learn all of the techniques required. And I mean, most people can go home, open up Unity, sit down with a couple of tutorials on YouTube that's completely free. Unity is free, the skills that you acquire are free. So it's like everything that you can build up in order to know how to develop games and actually publish a game is free. So if it's just about releasing a game, that's one thing. But if it's about getting a certain quality, of course, you need to have someone who's very dedicated to, for instance, programming, knows how to optimize, or someone who's dedicated to graphics and can do animation and such. So it depends a lot on the specific project, but we have heard a lot of success stories in general with just one developer.
Thank you. Stefan, your opinion?
Well, I mean, you saw in my slides that what kind of teams we're talking about. You guys are right. Absolutely, one person can make a difference. But I would say personally, I would want to always have at least one other person that can give me always a sanity check on my own thoughts. Otherwise, you're just developing in a silo and you have no idea what's good or what's not good. So, in my opinion, I would say at least 2 or 3 people. Also within a supercell environment, I would say that's the right amount. One thing I have to say, though, hopefully we're still good in time, is that once you are in a bigger company, that you don't have to build anything from scratch anymore. So, because games are getting more complex over the course of the years, and the feature sets that you need to have at launch now is vastly more difficult or more challenging than the feature set that Haley had to have 6 years ago. Nowadays, the expectations are sky high, so you have to really do your homework. And that is an environment where in a slightly bigger company, you don't have to redo everything from scratch. You can take existing solutions and build on top of that. If you're alone in your garage, then you have to do everything from scratch, and that's a different scenario then.
Laura, one final comment from you?
I would say it depends on the kind of game that you want to make. The size of the team depends on the kind of game that you want to make, and that it's true. It's easy to pick up game development now, but I think it's like Blizzard games, which is easy to play, hard to master. It depends on the kind of game that you want to do and where you want to go with it. And I would say, for example, investors have a saying. They are oftentimes looking for the holy trinity, which means your team needs to be stable technically, so actually have the skills to deliver from a technical perspective. The game needs to look pretty because that's what actually creates awareness and interest. And you need to prove that you take into account that you are thinking about business, you are thinking about marketing, and you're not just gonna close yourself in a garage and I hope this helps.
Well, thank you very much. There are many more open questions, but to the audience, we will connect you, of course, with the speakers as well, with your most burning questions, so you will get the answers. I would like to thank all of you very much, Pirate, Light, also Stefan and Laura in Finland and in Sweden, for being with us today, for sharing your insights. Auch an Sie, liebe Zuseher, 1 zu 3 im Sauseschritt, läuft die Zeit. Wir haben das Ende beinahe erreicht. Am Ende unserer Kreativwirtschaftswebinare geben wir immer noch ein paar Exporttipps. Und in meinem Fall sind die Exporttipps zum einen: kennen Sie Ihren Markt? Und das ist insofern besonders wichtig, weil die Nordics oft gerne in einen Topf geworfen werden. Aber obwohl es doch kleinere Länder sind, sind alle durchaus immer unterschiedlich. Also das nicht vergessen. Und außerdem werden Sie Teil des Netzwerks. Die Leute kennen einander und wichtig ist, dass Sie auch Sie kennen. Das heißt, werden Sie Teil des Netzwerks und make yourself known. Und mein dritter Exporttipp wäre natürlich: nutzen Sie unsere Services, um genau Ihren Markt kennenzulernen und um Teil des Netzwerks zu werden. Die Außenwirtschaft Austria unterstützt mit individuellem Coaching für Kreativwirtschaftsunternehmen. Wir unterstützen auch mit Veranstaltungen. So möchte ich unbedingt auf unsere Zukunftsreise Games in der Öresund Region hinweisen, die wir im Frühling 2019 veranstalten werden. Wir kommen hier nach Kopenhagen, wir kommen hier auch nach Malmö, wir veranstalten die gemeinsam mit unseren Kollegen im Außenwirtschaftscenter Stockholm, besuchen Firmen, Organisationen und auch die Games Conference in Malmö, die im Mai stattfindet. Und dann auf alle Fälle noch die Förderungsmöglichkeiten, die Sie über die Internationalisierungsoffensive Go International bekommen können. Informationen einfach online abrufen, unsere Kreativwirtschaftsseite, unsere Go International Seite und natürlich auch vielen herzlichen Dank an die Kreativwirtschaft Austria. Ohne sie hätten wir heute sicher nicht so viele Zuschauer bekommen. Wir bedanken uns wirklich recht herzlich für die gute Kooperation, und die Kreativwirtschaft ist natürlich auch fürs Netzwerken da, für Unterstützung da. Also hier auch auf deren Website gehen und sich mit ihnen kurz schließen. In dem Sinne wünsche ich noch einen schönen Nachmittag. Hier haben Sie mir noch unsere direkten Kontaktadressen, wenn noch etwas offen geblieben sein sollte, was Sie unbedingt fragen wollen oder Ihnen einfach neue Ideen kommen, Sie mal wissen wollen. Wir, das sind auf der einen Seite das Außenwirtschaftscenter Kopenhagen und dann auch noch die Kollegen im Außenwirtschaftscenter Stockholm beziehungsweise im Außenwirtschaftsbüro Helsinki. Und dann in Wien in der Wirtschaftskammer selbst, in der Außenwirtschaft Austria, haben Sie Reane Löning. Das ist unsere Mrs. Kreativwirtschaft in der Wiener Hauptstraße. Bitte einfach jederzeit kontaktieren. Wir freuen uns auf, mit Ihnen in Kontakt zu sein und wünschen noch viel Erfolg und bis demnächst. Alles Gute.